So I think you guys are going to be really interested in what's coming up on the show today. This is an interview with Joe De Bruyn, the former National Secretary of the biggest union in the country, one of the most senior Labor Party power brokers. Joe is someone that gave a speech last year at ACU and 80% of the students walked out and the majority of the faculty as well. That's because he raised the topic of abortion. You're just going to be blown away by his story about what happened, how it felt to give that speech, why he chose to continue giving the speech. And we're going to reveal some details that were not aired in the mainstream press at the time. Now, it's a fascinating interview because of the wealth of experience he's got and also because of that particular experience last year. It's really one that you're going to want to watch. So I hope you enjoy it. And that's today on the Dr. Joe Show. Last year, you really suddenly became a sort of almost like national news, front page news, when you were asked to give a graduation speech at the Australian Catholic University, and you became very controversial. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, the year before, the university wrote to me out of the blue and said that the Senate of Australian Catholic University had decided to award me an honorary doctorate, and that they wanted me to give the graduation speech on the occasion of giving me that award. Did I agree? So because it was so much out of the blue, I made some inquiries and I realised that even though I wasn't looking for any honours at all, that if I said no, it would be sort of a rejection of the efforts that a number of people had gone to get to that point.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd better accept it. So I said yes. And so I prepared a speech and went to the university and gave that speech.
And that's not where the story ends.
No.
Because half the audience walked out. So tell us about the speech.
Well,
and what it was like to do that.
Well, in thinking about what I should speak about, I thought I just don't want to talk about the things that I had done as a trade union official, because those things were not really distinguishing me from any other trade union official. I was being given an honorary doctorate for my services to the Catholic Church. So I thought to myself, what have I done that I can talk about which would provide reasons for why the university might have wanted to honour me in this way. So I had only a short speech to give, so I had limited time. So I picked three subjects that I would cover. And one of them, of course, was the subject of abortion. Now, what I said about abortion was very brief. I just simply said that it is the killing of innocent human life. I gave the statistics both for Australia, about 80,000 or so lives lost each year, and apparently worldwide about 42 million lost each year. And I said they're dramatic figures, it can't be justified and it should be ended. So that was what I said about abortion. And as soon as I got onto that subject, people started walking out, and so more and more drifted out, and by the time the speech finished, I would say that 85 to 90% of the graduating students had walked out.
Wow.
Together with a majority of the academics.
The academics walked out too?
Yes, on the platform behind me. They walked out too.
I would never dream of doing that. I've sat through many a boring graduation speech in my time as an academic. No one has ever walked out. So you're quite a trailblazer, Joe.
Well, it wasn't a boring speech either. I mean, they couldn't.
Well, that was the problem. You should have written a boring speech.
I thought about doing a vanilla speech, but I thought there's no point in that.
Yeah.
Because everybody forgets what you've said.
Absolutely. I can't remember a single graduation speech that I've been through.
So I wanted to talk about what my experience had been, and then go on to talk to the students about that this is an example that they could follow as well. That if they had deeply held beliefs, then they shouldn't shirk talking about those things in public. They should not worry that this might affect their career or have other adverse implications for them. They should be respectful in how they present their views, but they should not hold back. That was really the message for the students. But only about 10% of the graduating students remained there. But they did give me a standing ovation at the end.
Wow.
So,
that wasn't reported in the left-wing press.
No, it wasn't.
The standing ovation from the ones that remained. How interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Gosh. So tell me what that's like, giving a speech like that and seeing 85% of the audience walk out, including faculty.
Well, it was very disconcerting. And when people started walking out in significant numbers, I had to make a decision as to whether I continued with what I was saying. And the easiest thing was to continue, and it was the right decision anyway. So that's what I did. I just continued to speak. And I also came to realise that the leadership of the university must have been aware that this was going to happen, because before the event, they had given me a detailed briefing on how the whole thing would proceed. There would be the procession into the hall. There would be the welcome to country, the national anthem, a prayer, and then they would give me the award and I would give my speech. So it was early on, and it was only after that that all of the students would go through their formal graduation process. So we processed in, we had the welcome to country, we had the national anthem, we had the prayer, and I thought to myself, now this is it, you're on, sort of thing. And they proceeded with the graduation of all the students.
Oh.
And after a while, I realised that what they were doing was they were getting the business of the whole event out of the way and leaving me to last, so that when the students walked out, they didn't need to come back in for their graduation.
Do you really think that's what was going on? That's shocking to me.
Without doubt.
Because every graduation I've ever been at, the students receive their award and they graduate last. So the inversion of that, did they have prior notice of what your speech was about?
Yes, they did. They'd asked me to provide them with the speech, which I did.
My goodness.
I gave it to them a month before.
Yeah.
They did come back to me and say they thought, they didn't say what they thought was wrong with the speech from their point of view, but they suggested that I might rewrite it. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to do that, because they're not going to, to tell me what I'm going to speak about. So they had said, if you don't want to change your speech, that's fine too. So I thought, well, I won't. And they said, fair enough. And that was I thought that was the end of it. But clearly they decided on the basis of the speech that there would be the walkouts. And when the whole thing was over, the remaining academics couldn't get away from me quickly enough. They provided security for me and my wife, and basically marched us out of the premises right through to our car, and off we went.
Wow.
It really was a very disgraceful episode.
This is at the Australian Catholic University.
Catholic University, giving me an award for my services to the Catholic Church. And I talk about Catholic issues, and the students walk out, that's one thing, but a majority of the academic staff as well. And they, of course, are employed by the university, and they should be dedicated to the mission of the university, and clearly they're not.
100%. If you didn't laugh, you would cry, because it's shocking that the Catholic Church would have their name behind a university and you would give that speech and the university would respond in that way.
Yeah.
I heard afterwards they sent an email to the Snowflake students who walked out to say if you were distressed or it upset you in any way, we've got these support services to kind of hold your hand through the process of having to sit through a speech where you just were confronted by the opinion.
Yes. Yeah. They offered them counselling, and they also said that they would reimburse the fees they had paid to graduate. As a reimbursement. So it was quite an extraordinary event.
It's shocking. I think that's absolutely shocking that's the response to the students. They should have been offering you counselling. Did you get an offer?
I got no offer for counselling, but
I don't think you would have needed it because you know that you were doing the right thing, but it still would have been very upsetting to have gone through that.
yes, it was. I was concerned about it because it was the last thing that I expected on the day. It was particularly bad for my wife, and I had two of my sons there, one with his wife and one with his fiancée, and they were quite distraught after the event over what had happened, and so I thought that was not fair. But I've now put that thing behind me. But one of the consequences of it was that there was this extraordinary outpouring of support for me, not only in the media, in what immediately followed, but in what has happened since then. And even now, I am getting requests for speaking engagements to talk about the sort of issues I had spoken about at ACU, and also how we should deal with difficult issues where you have a strong view, and how do you deal with that in society, and how do you, how do you get the guts, if you like, to stand up for your views.
And I think that's what I take away from it, that we really are at a point where our young people are going through an education system where they're not being confronted with alternative viewpoints, and they're being taught according to the radical left orthodoxy on whatever issue, you name it, and they're not being taught to critically engage with opinions and data that they find uncomfortable. And you said abortion kills human beings. The death toll is extraordinary. And those should not be controversial things. I think if you identify as someone who is pro-choice or pro-abortion, you should be able to grapple with what it is you're actually for.
It's quite paradoxical, actually, that we live in a society where information is available at the tip of your finger, at your fingertips, with social media and so on, and quick access to the internet and whatever. Yet we do live in a society where people are information poor in many ways. They do not understand all the sides of issues, particularly controversial issues, because it's never put in front of them.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick take on this? So Australian Catholic University is probably symptomatic of a broader problem even within Australian Catholic schools. But if we just use it as a microcosm, so you give a graduation speech calling out abortion, which is totally consistent with Catholic teaching. Last year, ACU appointed Professor Katie Galloway to be the Dean of Law, only to discover, because of community outcry, that she's actually an activist for abortion up to birth, that she'd published on that. And so they gave her $1.1 million to step down as Dean of Law, but to still be in a substantive position at the university. I know Notre Dame's just been through a recruitment process in Sydney for their head of school for law, and they haven't appointed a practicing Catholic. What's your view on Catholic institutions that appoint people to positions of senior leadership who aren't actually Catholic or necessarily aligned with the Catholic mission? Now, I'm not sure about the Notre Dame person, whether he would be supportive of Catholic church teaching, but he's not a Catholic, and Katie Galloway certainly wasn't. She was actively fighting against church teaching. What do you think should happen in those circumstances?
Well, the universities, their mission is to provide education, but from the Catholic perspective. So they should not be appointing academics who are not on board with the mission of the university. In fact, Pope St. John Paul II in the early 90s put out it wasn't an encyclical, but it was some sort of official document explaining how a Catholic university should be there to carry out the evangelising mission of the church within society as part of their education. And this is what Australian Catholic University and many other institutions like it are not doing, deliberately not doing that, and that's wrong.
I agree. So one of the things that I've admired about you for a long time, in fact, you're one of the reasons I joined the Labor Party back in the day, was because I believed that because I've always been passionate like you about justice for working people. I'm the daughter of a migrant, and just watching both my father and mother have different struggles in the workplace as I was growing up, that kind of led me to a desire to be involved in that space. I actually didn't know about Emily's List, being a pro-abortion arm within, well, they sit outside of the Labor Party, but they're so influential in the party. I think a big question that people have these days is, can you be in the Labor Party as someone that is against abortion, given that the party itself seems to have moved so far to the pro-abortion end of this?
You can be a member of the Labor Party. The Labor Party in 1984, so you're going back a long time, passed a resolution at its national conference saying that the issue of abortion could be debated in party forums at the state and the national level, but any decision would not be binding on any member of the Labor Party. So it's an inbuilt conscience vote, and that sits in the constitution and rules of the party, alongside with a few other sort of key decisions that the party has made over the years. So you can be a member and you can be pro-life, but you're going to be a rather lonely person. Because while there are some people in the Labor Party who are pro-life, there tend to be very few of them. And so when the issue of abortion does come up, particularly in the state parliaments, you'll find that you as a pro-lifer are likely to be one of very few who has the view of being pro-life and therefore anti-abortion. So you can join. And I must say that there is a real need for people to be in the Labor Party and in the other major political parties as well, to put the pro-life view. Because if we avoid joining major parties just because we have a view that at the moment happens to be less popular, then you're never going to change it.
Having said all of that, though, I may have been a member of the Labor Party, but I can't think the last time I voted Labor, because my local candidate has always been pro-abortion. So I can't in good conscience vote for a person who, when the moment comes, would advance the killing of innocent children. Do you accept that that may be the quandary people face?
They would face that quandary, but voting is secret. How a person votes is not known to anybody else because it is secret. And you are entitled to follow your conscience on this issue, as the Labor Party constitution and rules specifically provide. It doesn't bind you.
So you can be a member, but obviously when you vote, you've got to vote according to your conscience on this issue.
Exactly.
I have been really encouraging people to join the Liberal Party, because I feel that of the two major parties, that's the party that has the greatest chance of becoming a pro-life party, because they don't have the influence of Emily's List. You're someone that, based on the time frame you've identified, you've lived through the creation of Emily's List and the influence it then has had. Can you speak to that at all? Could you tell us about what because they would say they're not just about abortion, but when I look through the history, I can sort of see that was probably the number one motivating factor, abortion up to birth, because abortion should never be restricted for women. And
yes, Emily's List came into existence quite some years after the Labor Party adopted that policy I referred to earlier, that the issue of abortion can be debated within party forums, but it cannot bind any individual member. And the current platform of the Labor Party does provide for support for people to be able to terminate their pregnancy if they want to, and also they support safe access, as they say, to abortion facilities. So those zones outside an abortion place where pro-life people are not allowed to be, they support that.
So that is part of the platform of the Labor Party,
part of the
abortion
policy platform of the Labor Party. That's right. So they're clearly they believe an individual person has the right to choose to continue with the pregnancy or to end the pregnancy, and there's no limit in the policy on that at all. So it can be right up to the point of birth. That's clearly what the policy is.
And that's a problem.
That's a problem. Now, Emily's List came along after that original decision of 1984, and they have been promoting women into the Labor Party, but they won't support any woman who is pro-life. So their whole bias is to get women into the Labor Party who are pro-abortion.
Yeah.
A pro-life woman would not get the endorsement of Emily's List.
What do you think about unions that take on positions around abortion? So, for example, in the recent Queensland election, the union movement was campaigning heavily against the Liberals on the basis that they were going to recriminalise abortion. I think it pretty much was a scare campaign. But do you think unions should be doing that?
No, of course not. It takes me back to an ACTU Congress. So this is the Parliament of the trade union movement, and there was an ACTU Congress. It was probably sometime in the 1980s, the early 1980s, and the issue of abortion was brought up there. And I can remember I was one of a group of people who were going to argue against abortion, and the primary argument was going to be, this is not trade union business. This has got nothing to do with people's lives at work. I can't remember whether I actually gave a speech or not, but that was one occasion when it did come up. And so my view is that unions should not be involved in abortion because it is not a trade union issue.
I agree. And I think it dissuades a lot of people from joining unions because they are touching these other issues.
Yes, well, if unions are seen to be involved in matters that are not their core business, people should say to themselves, why should I pay my union fees to an organisation which is getting involved in non-work issues, things that don't relate to wages or conditions or health and safety at work or whatever? Why should I pay my money to them, particularly if I don't agree with their views?
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, but one of the suspicions I have is that the Labor Party uses, or they particularly deploy, faith-based MPs or MPs who profess to be Christian or Catholic into socially conservative electorates to win those because they know they have to win those. But ultimately, the party itself has moved so far to the left and they push a radically left agenda. So I'm thinking about the recent campaign that we've had in New South Wales against the Greens bill that gave the Minister for Health an extraordinary power to compel publicly funded hospitals to perform abortions, even if they were faith-based hospitals receiving public funding. And to override the conscience rights of doctors they had to actively transfer to a person who would kill that child. Now, this was a really radical bill that the Minns Labor government gave government time to. It wouldn't be the law right now if Minns, who claims to be a Catholic, hadn't prioritised it to allow it to be rushed through the Parliament. It'd just be a private member's bill that'd be languishing there, getting an hour every few weeks for debate. Instead, it got government time, pushed through within 2 weeks. And yet, Labor in Western Sydney, where there's these socially conservative electorates, you've got MPs who really go after that Catholic vote. You know, Michelle Rowland's a federal MP, but she's on the record after the 2019 election loss saying, you know, we need to reach out to these faith communities. And there's lots of pictures of her in churches. Albo went to church during the recent federal election campaign, said he was coming back to church. I mean, I think the Labor Party is manipulating people of faith to vote for them when, if you're a person of faith, the last party you should be voting for is Labor because they're so aggressively pro-abortion when it comes down to it. And not just abortion, but other issues too. They push a radically left agenda. This might not have been the way it was when you were and the SDA had more prominence. Now it really feels like the socialist left have taken over the Labor Party and they keep a couple of MPs around who they can manipulate faith-based voters to vote for.
Yes, well, there's no doubt that the left have taken over the Labor Party in recent times, and this has happened over the last 10 years. There have been 2 or 3 key unions that were previously on the right who are now on the left, and that has been sufficient to change the balance. So at a national conference of the Labor Party now, the left has a majority, and they have a majority, I think, in every single state except New South Wales and South Australia. So the left have taken over. I see politicians sometimes during an election campaign going to churches with cameras in tow and photographers and so on, and asking the priest or the religious person whether they can address the congregation at some point during the church service for political reasons. And that to me is wrong. I know the Labor Party does that. I don't know whether any other political parties do it as well, but I have seen examples of the Labor Party doing that, and that is fundamentally wrong. Politicians, by their very nature, and there are very few exceptions to this, set out to agree with everybody who comes to them. So if you have a particular issue that you want to raise with, say, a local member, the politician will represent themselves as basically being in agreement with you, and they will do whatever they can, they say, to assist you. But they may in fact have no intention whatsoever to help you at all. And this is how politics works. There are very few people in politics who are genuinely highly principled. The best example I can give to people of a politician, a very exceptional politician who was highly principled, was Senator Brian Harradine from Tasmania. Now, interestingly, he was the president of the Tasmanian branch of the SDA, the union I worked for. He was a member of the Labor Party until he was expelled on false evidence in 1975. So he then turned around and said, right, I'm standing as an independent for the Senate, which he did, and he represented Tasmania in the Senate for the next 30 years. And I knew him during that period very well, and he was a highly principled man, but he was an exception. Unfortunately, most politicians, you couldn't say they were highly principled, and they will wave with the wind. Whatever way the wind is blowing, that's the way you'll find them bending. And that's most unfortunate.
So for the people that are watching, and for myself, who care about this issue of abortion and believe that we've gone way too far, what is the way we can have the biggest impact on politicians and on changing our laws?
Well, it's got to come from the ground up. It will not come from any of the political parties that are likely to be influential in parliaments. It's got to come from the ground up, and it can be done by people joining political parties and starting to get their views expressed there and starting to work on the policies of the parties. And when issues arise, like the sorts of issues that you have been pursuing over the last year or two, getting masses of people together to show the politicians that there is real rank and file support for the pro-life positions that you are pushing. And politicians take notice when they see large numbers of people who are upset about something. They take notice. So it's got to come from the ground up, both within political parties and also, having marches or demonstrations or rallies, talking to people in Parliament, having representative groups go to politicians to sort of pursue an issue. That sort of grassroots activity is the way it's got.
So it actually makes a difference. Like the emails, the meetings, the phone calls,
absolutely.
The rallies. Yeah.
Absolutely, because what politicians don't like is people out there being critical of what they're doing, and they're very sensitive to that. So you have to put the pressure on them, and I think you do it very effectively.
Well, I have been called a bully by the Premier and Opposition Leader of New South Wales.
If somebody calls you a bully, it means you're being effective.
Okay,
it means it's working.
Note to self. Yeah. One of the things I find hard though is Okay, so you're up against a pro-abortion political culture, but then you have the media establishment that I feel is, you know, the Australian and Sky, who are technically our conservative media, they're pretty afraid of touching the abortion issue. They'll dip their toe in the water only when something really extreme happens, like 85% of people walk out of your speech, then they'll cover it. But the fact that we have abortion up to birth in this country across the place, and babies in certain states are born alive and then left to die, I mean, that's just accepted. It's not ever reported on. And for example, when they go after me for being a bully, what typically happens is someone like Mark Speakman says it in the Parliament, or Julia Finn, and then the press, the pro-abortion media repeat it to character assassinate you to try to stop you speaking, and they get away with it because it's a quote that was said under parliamentary privilege. How do we combat that?
At the end of the day, it's got to be done through education. Now, the pro-life position is based upon the truth that there is a new human being in existence from the moment of conception. Now, you see that in a biology textbook when you do first-year biology at university. It's a fact that the scientific community knows and which is easily available. And this is how we have to pursue our arguments, on the basis that we are putting the truthful position in front of people. And when you do that, logically, you're going to eventually win. People who say, oh, it's just a clump of cells, or it's part of the mother's body, and all those sorts of arguments, they will not continue to have any traction when people understand what the truthful position is. So there is a big job to be done in terms of education. There ought to be far more education of this in the schools, but there's not. But education in what is the truthful position is ultimately the way that we're going to win.
Yeah, and I think that's on parents. You know, I teach my children from a very young age that when someone is pregnant, it's a baby that they're pregnant with, and we talk about that even from the age of 4 or 5. We are talking about that at home. And I think obviously that's on teachers and schools, but grandparents can have that role. All of us can actually have a role in ending this. I think my final question for you, though, is one around the fact that a lot of young people, or even other people watching this, would feel scared. And I don't blame them, because the attacks in this space are ferocious. They'd be scared about social ostracisation, but particularly career adverse impacts. What would you say to them as someone who's lived out courage? And I would say for some of your career, it probably wasn't that courageous to be pro-life, because that was prevailing community standards. But certainly that zeitgeist has shifted, and you now are an outlier in the Labor Party. What would your advice be to us around courage?
Well, first of all, I'd say to people that, you know, you are not on your own. There are other people like you with similar views, identical views. And so when you work as a group, that is one, I think, very effective way of overcoming concerns people might have. You're part of a team. You're part of a group of people that is actually advancing a cause that you know to be right, and historically will be seen to be right. So the fact that, you know, that there's more than just one person, that there is an organisation which is sort of out there fighting the good fight, that's what gives people courage to be able to overcome the concerns they might otherwise have.
But sometimes you are the person alone. So at ACU, when you were giving that speech, you were alone. Or if I think of some of the young people that reach out and say, this topic came up in class and I was the only person speaking up for the human rights of the child. What do you do? How do you cope? How do you find that courage to do it in those moments?
Well, it depends on the individual and whether they're religious. But prayer is certainly, I think, part of it. And it has been for me over the years. But I can honestly say that now, at the age of 75, 10 years into retirement from full-time work, that while I have been in controversial issues for much of that, you know, more than 40 years in my time with the union, my views were never a factor in affecting my career at all. And the reason I put that down to is that I was always very reasonable in how I presented my arguments. There was always logic there, rather than sort of doing it in a way that would put other people off. And so people came to respect my views. And so even if they disagreed with me, they would nevertheless respect me. So after this controversy at Australian Catholic University last year, when I'd given the speech, I got a phone call from a colleague in the trade union movement who was always at the other end of the spectrum for me on any issues, but he was making common cause with me. So people respect you if you put your views well, and in my case, it certainly never affected my career at all.
I think I have found that initially when I started speaking up about abortion, but I wasn't having that great an impact, it was easier for colleagues and others to accept me being this person who's saying these things. But what I have found is, once I started really properly getting involved, so last year helping draft that bill in South Australia that banned killing babies in the third trimester, and then leading this campaign in New South Wales, that's probably gotten me into places where there's just all of these campaigns to get me sacked. And I think that there is a go-to now around let's just remove that person, let's cancel them, let's walk out of the speech because we don't like what they're saying. And I do feel like the debate has shifted. Our capacity to have these conversations has changed. But that doesn't mean that we won't get to another place where we're better at free debate again. But
at the same time, I think that, after I'd given that ACU speech, I mentioned that there was this outpouring of support. I had all sorts of people come to me in different ways, sometimes by phone, by letter, or just approaching me. I went to a funeral late last year here in Melbourne, and then a second funeral again early in the new year. And at those funerals, I had people coming to me whom I had never met before, and I have no idea who they are, and I'll probably never see them again, saying, "You're Joe De Bruyn, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And they're saying, "Thank you for speaking out the way you did." People admire those who speak out on controversial subjects.
That's actually true. That does remind me of the fact that that is also true, that after the Live Births Bill and the New South Wales campaign, I've never had as much support and encouragement from people. I sometimes forget that and focus on them. And I think it's human nature to focus on the negative.
People would be coming up to you in the street as you're walking down the street and talking to you.
They do, and that is true.
That.
Yeah.
There are heaps of people out there who, once they see somebody who is standing up for the things they believe in a courageous way, they will be there supporting you. And when they get the opportunity, they will come to you and say so.
And that is true. I'm glad you reminded me of that.
And that is very encouraging.
Yeah. And I know I said that was the last question, but I have one more.
Yeah.
Just because I reckon there'll be people listening to this or watching this, and I reckon this might be an insult, or I don't know if you've heard it, but I just feel like some people would go, "You're an old white man. You don't get to have a say on this." Now, I don't buy into that at all, hence why you're here and I'm interviewing you. I hate that attitude. But can I just ask you, does that affect you at all? Do you not speak because of it? Or what's your response to the kind of that sort of puerile position?
Well, it's a nonsense argument. That's the first thing I would say. But I do believe that the pro-life cause is likely to be successful more if there are young women at its forefront rather than, say, old guys like me. That's why I think you're very effective, because you are a woman and you're young. You can talk about your family. You've got 5 kids. Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like 100. We have 5 though.
Well, we have 5, and I've seen them, and they run around, and they're like any other kids. But that enables you to argue the case far more comprehensively and better and more persuasively than somebody who is old and retired and who's only got grandchildren, which is what my position is. So I think the argument is a nonsense one, but having women in the vanguard of the pro-life cause, in my view, is most important.
Having said that, it was an old white man, you, that got the biggest headlines on abortion last year, which allowed a conversation on it. So that I guess I want people who are watching this to go, I think we all have our role to play. And something Professor Helen Alvarez said to me, she's a pro-life professor from the US, and when I was thinking about doing this thing where I'd speak out about abortion, I had Zoomed her and asked her about it. And she did say that strategically they made a decision in the US to put women at the front of the movement back in the 90s, because that was important to counter that whole this is feminism and it's, abortion is pro-women when it's not. And so I think strategically that's important, but I also think that every person has their role to play. And it was a man that made me pro-life because he asked me questions. You, in giving that speech and some of the things you've done, have been really powerful. So I actually think no one's exempt from doing their bit.
No. I mean, men should speak out, and that's what I have done over the years. But I think having women, advancing the cause as you are doing is particularly
It is important.
effective.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to speak to?
No, I think it's, I am watching what you do with enormous interest, because there never has been in my long life a person who is as dynamic and as persuasive in putting the pro-life cause as you are doing. So I just think that you should just keep on going, because you are putting fear into those anti-life people in high positions in our society, because you are so effective.
That's good.
You are never short of an argument. You know all the arguments and you can put them very effectively, and I just think you're doing a wonderful job.
Oh, thanks, Joe. That's lovely.
In my retirement, I do a lot of things. I do a lot of reading, and I've got grandchildren and so on. But I also watch how you're going, because I think your campaign is particularly effective.
And it is a campaign. It is I was actually working for Bill Shorten in Melbourne as a unionist, and when I had this conversion on abortion, and at that point I was 21, but I really felt we should be campaigning on this issue 24/7 because it's so important. And I think
it's a bit like the movement against slavery. So you're going back a couple of centuries there, but slavery was sort of widely accepted in society, but a small number of people in sort of key positions realised that this had to change, and they started campaigning. And when we look back on that today, we say to ourselves, how could society have ever accepted slavery? It's so obnoxious. And the time will come when people will say the same thing about abortion. They will say, how on earth could a society just allow abortion up to birth, the deliberate ending of human life right up to birth? That's just so obnoxious in itself. How could society have ever done it? So it'll happen at some point in the future. We don't know when, but there's no doubt in my mind that, like slavery, abortion will disappear.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much for coming in, and it was a really good chat.
Thank you very much.